NSA's illegal domestic wiretapping, FBI's national security letters, state secrets privilege, TSA's 1 million plus no-fly list, persecution of government whistleblowers, perpetual wars, rendition and torture. Can you feel the water boiling?
Welcome to the Boiling Frogs. With Sibel Edmonds, I'm Peter B. Collins, and our guest today is Naomi Wolf, an author who's written on many subjects, starting with the beauty myth a few years back. And I've had the pleasure of talking with her on a number of occasions. The last time was in the fall of 2008, when she published Give Me Liberty, a handbook for American revolutionaries. Naomi, welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I pulled out your book off my shelf today and just took a look at some of the pages that I had bent back, and I started with the introduction, where you describe what you called a fascist shift in the United States. And you run down some of the very themes that Sibel just mentioned in the introduction to this show, which include the TSA's watch list, the 9/11 report based on evidence derived from tortured prisoners, the admission that the drive to war in Iraq had been based on lies, and many other issues that we don't need to repeat. But I wanted to ask you for, as we begin here, your thoughts on the current state of affairs under the Obama administration, and if you believe that things have gotten better, stayed the same, or gotten worse.
In some ways, they've gotten worse. Let me rephrase that slightly. I don't feel the kind of headlong rush to continue over a cliff that I did in the Bush administration, but in a way it's worse, because what I do see is that where Obama could have rolled back some of the sort of preliminary forays into a closed society, he's actually very intently consolidating and institutionalizing them. For example, with case after case, his Justice Department has taken on the Bush administration's very same state secrets claims in order to deny prisoners justice. The most chilling example to me, and I was in Guantanamo in July when a prisoner quote unquote committed suicide, and now there's increasing reporting indicating that something very dark and disturbing happened to him there. And there's a very important story by Scott Horton in this month's Harper's, challenging the quote unquote suicides of 2006 and suggesting that they were, all of them probably murders. But what he's doing is floating, and he's going to do it, a notion of preventive detention forever, which is worse than anything Bush ever even attempted. And so in a number of ways, I'm just so appalled, because first of all, I fought hard to get him to help him be elected, but I don't understand. This is a constitutional lawyer. I don't understand what is motivating him, unless, in fact, the Defense Department and the sort of multi-billion-dollar contracting industry is so influential in our national affairs that he really doesn't have the power to refuse to go down this road. So, in some ways, it's worse. In many ways, it's worse.
Naomi, did he give any indication in terms of action as a senator that he was going to be any different? Because as National Security Whistleblowers Coalition, we did go to his office, and he was one of those who was against protection for whistleblowers as a senator. Later on, when he was, running his campaign, he promised on the record that he was going to be supporting any laws to protect national security whistleblowers. Well, just a few weeks ago, he said absolutely not. And in fact, this White House has been fighting it even more ferociously and harder than the Bush administration. And then his stand also with the NSA's illegal wiretapping and the immunity for the telecom. So if we were to go back and look at his actions, what were those actions that would even indicate as a senator that, yes, we were going to see any change?
Well, his campaign, more than I do, Sibel, about what his record was when he was a senator. I started paying attention during the presidential campaign, and he very overtly ran on promise to end torture, close Guantanamo. Remember, I was so ecstatic when he signed that executive order on day one, close Guantanamo within a year. He challenged the suppression of our liberties. He was explicit about trying to reclaim the moral high ground in terms of liberty. So, I don't know if it's helpful for your audience, but I watch this and I'm completely baffled, because it's not as if he didn't, when he was campaigning, it's not as if he didn't talk about the Constitution, civil liberties with awareness. He talked about it as someone who knows intimately what the Constitution says and why it's important. So again, it leads me to even a scarier conclusion than I had during Bush years, which is that basically I have to conclude that the U.S. president just doesn't have that much power anymore, and really isn't calling the shots fundamentally. I mean, look at Blackwater. So egregious, so terrifying. I mean, people have read At the End of America, my first book about this, and Give Me Liberty, the sequel, know that I raised Blackwater in the second step toward closing an open society, which is creating a paramilitary force, which every closing society does. So during the Bush years, we had Nisour Square, where Blackwater agents really opened fire on innocent civilians. We had them opening bases in South Carolina, in Illinois, in San Diego. We had reports of contractors shooting unarmed civilians in Katrina, which is now actually being confirmed by an investigation. The contractor threat is immense. And so now it turns out that there are 200,000 contractors still employed by the Pentagon. So does Obama say, I am never going to hire Blackwater again? They're done. No more contracts? No. Blackwater is in Afghanistan, working for us with our tax dollars. So again, my head just spins, because what kind of pressures are there on the United States president that there is continuity of this kind with people like that?
Right. Dan Ellsberg, we had him as a guest on our show, and he called it very openly. He said, we were conned. We were conned into voting, and that makes him a con man in my eyes, and that was stated by Dan Ellsberg. Russ Baker calls it the shadow government, the power of shadow government, deep state, what you just referred to, the military-industrial complex. And I would like to be able to call it, hopefully, the end of this two-party system when they have become the two sides of the same coin. What do you call it, Naomi?
Well, Sibel, you raise a very important and useful and necessary point, and I really have to kind of thank the libertarians and the Ron Paul supporters who have reached out to me over the last few years and kind of taken me under their wing to educate me, because, obviously I come from a liberal or a progressive background, and I wasn't exposed until recently to this idea that both the political parties are two sides of the same coin, and that both of them are, at this point, the enemies of the people. Now, I heartily, endorse and agree with that. I'm still left of center, but, pardon me, but I no longer think that a certain political party getting in power of these two is going to be the answer, because clearly, and I worked on two presidential campaigns, actually not doing wardrobe consulting, contrary to the Republican National Committee's, mythology, but involved in women's issues. And what you see is that both the political parties are hostage to special interests. They're just different special interests. So, Sibel, I think what's happening, and again, this is just very impressionistic based on talking to groups and my Facebook quote unquote fan community, which is very diverse, and just hearing from people across the political spectrum when I'm on shows like this one. But I feel like there is an awakening, inshallah, as we might say in the Middle East, God willing, there's an awakening of people left, right, center, it doesn't matter, realizing that those labels are really, secondary, if not pointless. Republican and Democrat are secondary, if not pointless labels. And that what the real opposition is the people and the Constitution versus these special interests that have hijacked our political process. So now what I try to focus on, Sibel, is, sort of alternative media and alternative entities, and I'm trying to build one actually, that channel that awakening of people across the political spectrum to kind of break up this hegemony. What that's going to look like, I think, is anybody's guess. As many people across the country are trying to do similar things, but it is exciting to me that, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, don't you think that notion that it's not about Republican Democrat, it's about the people versus these special interests, that's kind of more widespread, don't you think, recently?
I take a little different view, Naomi, which is I'm disappointed at the passivity that the Patriot Act was just renewed and people were distracted by a sideshow of the Obama healthcare summit at the White House. And that, we've seen the prosecution for clear acts of war crimes declared optional and taken off the table because we want to look forward, not backward, and people are accepting that. And the escalation of the war in Afghanistan, because it's being done by a Democratic president, is not producing a response from the anti-war community the way it did from Bush.
Peter, you're so right about that. I have to say it's one of those glass half empty, half full things. And my days are like that. Some days I'll wake up and think, wow, people are waking up. And then other days I'll read the newspaper or I'll observe events like the renewal of the Patriot Act, which, by the way, I didn't see coverage in the New York Times of it. I may have missed it. I was alerted to it by, my Facebook community, which goes to show how pretty the mainstream media coverage of, our priorities are. But, I vacillate. I mean, on a bad day, I would wake up and say exactly what you said. At the same time, and I have to also say, as a member technically of the left, although more libertarian and less and less left, it's shameful that the anti-war liberals have been silent on Obama's war or not mobilizing the way they did with Bush's war. It's shocking. It's horrifying. It's hypocritical. It's wrong. But the other two things you raised, I mean, this is where we really need to kind of knock our heads together as citizens. What can people do? Like, day after day after day, I have a reasonable platform, and, I get published, and people pay attention to what I say to some extent. And, day after day, I raise the alarm about prosecutions and trying to get these guys prosecuted and trying to get the petition signed and trying to get people calling their representatives. And there's a lot of outrage about there being impunity for these war crimes. But what can people do? There's no leverage anymore. And the same thing with, signing the Patriot Act. What can people do? What are our pressure points? I mean, at the end of Give Me Liberty, I offered 55 action steps that people could take, and that will help. But what we need to create are new institutions where people can actually direct their anger effectively, because, calling your representative isn't going to do it anymore. Do you have any better suggestions? I mean, what I'm building right now are democracy retreats where we're training leaders from the community, homemakers, and we had 2 Afghanistan war veterans at our pilot retreat 2 weeks ago. We're training them to go out, we're training them to, draft their own legislation, start their own organizations, run for office, write op-eds, really hijack the process in a way the Tea Partyers are sort of similarly, trying to build grassroots effectiveness to direct some of this anger. Although I'm worried about them being co-opted by Republicans. But apart from those kinds of actions, where does someone who's frustrated direct their, ire, Peter?
I think the movement is highly fragmented. That's I think was one of the problems. You do have some of the independence, but it is fragmented. And I agree with you. With Congress until 2006 November, we were making our rounds, and we had battles. We had press conferences in front of the congressional offices about how bad things were, not only for national security whistleblowers, but with state secrets privilege and excessive secrecy, etc. And the excuse was, we were being hoorayed and backed by the Democrats, and they kept pointing to the Republicans, saying they are the ones who are doing this. We want to have all these accountability hearings because they are the majority. They are preventing it. And as soon as they became the majority, they stopped even answering the calls from these organizations, the people who supported them. And that, especially after 2008, I see a lot of people have given up. It's like those classic channels try to affect your representative. They don't work because extreme situations, circumstances may be calling for extreme measures, but what are those? And some of the solutions seem to be too long-term, like you're looking at maybe seeing results in 10, 12 years. When we have entered, many people, they're saying, oh, we are about to become a police state. This is the right. It's like, who tells you we are not there? Because if you look at the criteria, we have fulfilled it.